You're recording now.
Okay.
Look at those two handsome fellows. Oh my goodness gracious. What's going on here?
All right.
There we go.
I had to record and then share. Okay.
And then you can just, yeah, so
Yeah.
just,
Okay. Awesome sauce.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So this is a little session on data wrapper. I see one of my students, two of my students here. If you haven't already taken data, this is going to be just what we do in class anyways, but you're welcome to stick around. Okay. So I thought more people would have laptops than do, but so you'll have to sort of remember stuff. But I would take down this URL. This is also on David's resource thing, so if you've already got that, it's fine. But bit.ly/CAJ-data wrapper has both a handout that's going to cover what we're going to be covering today and a spreadsheet. And then the website that we're going to be looking at is data wrapper, and it's at datawrapper.de. I'm just going to go here to this website here and download these things here. And Francesca is helping me. So if you guys have technical problems or questions, or if I say something wrong, she can step in here.
Oh, the recording in the garbage.
Why? Okay, I'm gonna use this. All right. So data wrapper is, I use a variety of different data visualization tools. Probably my favorite data visualization tool, if I had to pick one, would be Tableau, because it's the most powerful and can do lots of cool sort of interactive charts and stuff like that. But data wrapper is kind of the one that I feel most kind of emotionally attached to for a few different reasons. I find it's the easiest data visualization tool to use. It's the one that I use in my class at Kwantlen. For people that are beginning in data visualization, it's the simplest to understand, the least likely to make errors on. And it's also the best for making kind of simple charts. So when you're not doing anything super fancy, but you just have a little bit of data that you want to pull into a bar chart, or you want to pull into a line chart, it's a really easy to use, simple tool. The other nice thing about data wrapper is it was actually built by journalists. It was built by German journalists, which is why it's .de for Deutschland. Their lead, I don't know if he's called programmer or chief technology officer, Gregor Aisch, was actually at the New York Times before he was at Data Wrapper, did some of their sort of most famous interactive data visualizations. And so at their core, they really are a data visualization tool for journalists. A lot of news organizations, I believe the CBC is one of the big ones in Canada, use it as their kind of in-house data visualization tool. It's free to use, but then if you kind of want your own little branding on it and stuff like that, you have to pay for it. So I'm going to walk you guys through some really basic stuff in data wrapper, how to make a basic bar chart in data wrapper, how to make a basic line chart in data wrapper. And then if we have time, I might show you how to make a really basic map. And then Francesca will interrupt me if I say things that are wrong or if she has ideas for other stuff. I'll actually just open up here data wrapper to start with. You guys can see what we're doing. So you can log in for a free account. If you type login here, you can sign up for a free account. It'll do the usual thing where it sends a confirmation thing to your email. You can actually also just create charts without even signing up for data wrapper to start with. One of the things I like the best about data wrapper is its simplicity. So if I go over here to create new, I want to create a new chart. The basic interface of data wrapper is sort of a 4-step process. And I find this kind of mirrors a lot of what we do in data visualization and data journalism, but I like how they've kind of simplified things. So it's really, really clear what the steps are, and you can actually jump between the different steps if you need to. So the first step is we upload our data, we get our data into data wrapper. The second step is we check and describe our data. So we sort of look for errors, we make sure the numbers are formatted properly, stuff like that. The third step is that we visualize our data, we turn our data into a chart. And then the final step is that we publish our data. And then usually we then want to take that chart and put it into some sort of CMS or website or something like that, so that people don't have to go to data wrapper to see our chart. They can see it on the Tyee, or they can see it on the CBC, or they can see it on the Globe and Mail. One of the other things I like about data wrapper a lot is right here in the corner. This used to be a question mark. Now it's a little cap and gown thing. At any point, you can search for help. Okay, so you can search for specific things like how do I make a bar chart in Data Wrapper, how to add charts to tooltips, how to create a stack bar chart, customizing your bar chart. One of the other things that's nice about Data Wrapper is, again, because they have a real passion for this and they came up through journalism, you'll find in here not just sort of help articles about how do I actually build this in Data Wrapper, but also kind of best practices articles, like what are some of the things we should keep in mind when we're making bar charts? What are some of the things we should keep in mind when we're making line charts? A lot of those posts have been written by one of their staff members, Lisa Charlotte Rose, who's just a really clear, great writer about kind of the principles of data visualization. So anytime you're stuck on something in Data Wrapper, you can go right there and do searches for it, which makes it really helpful. Okay, so we want to get our data in here. There's lots of different ways we can get our data into here. We can upload an XLS or a CSV file. We can connect to a Google Sheet. We can link to external data, but we can also just copy and paste our data right into Data Wrapper from a tool like Excel. One of the weird peculiarities of Data Wrapper, and I think some of this has to do with the fact that they're German, but I'm not sure, is that they don't like fancy number formatting. And I think some of this has to do with sort of like CSV files. Some of it has to do with the way that numbers are sometimes formatted differently in Europe than they are for us. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. But if you have numbers like this, so this is data on political donations, where it's in dollar signs or with commas and stuff like that, Data Wrapper is not going to like that formatting. Okay, and it might actually screw things up because it might think that the comma is actually meant to be like in CSV, it means a new column or something like that. It might not recognize this as a number. It might mistakenly think it's like a string or a word or something like that. So almost always in Data Wrapper, before you get something into Data Wrapper, you want to clean up your data in Excel or Google Sheets. Just have the number. Okay, we don't want any dollar signs, we don't want any percentage signs, we don't want any commas. Okay, and how to do this in different tools varies. In Excel, we just click on the column, right click, and format, but that's not working. Why is that not working? Hold on a second. Oh, is it because it's protected? Okay, hold on a second here. Save as.
I'll just echo, like, Data Wrapper definitely is not a place where you want to have any data that is dirty or not formatted. You have to have it formatted basically perfectly before you put it in, or it'll give you a lot of errors. It will let you know that it's not right. So
Yeah,
at least
you
there's
get a
that.
dreaded red X.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So when we talk about data formatted nicely, in almost all data visualizations or data analysis tools, what we mean by that is that the very first row describes your data and everything after that is data. Okay, so you'll sometimes get weird things like you've probably gotten spreadsheets that have like the health authority logo at the top in the first 3 rows or something like that. You don't want that. You want nice sort of clean data like this. So luckily I kind of anticipated this problem a little bit. And for those of you that don't have problems formatting, right in the tab assigned here, donations by party clean, I've got it reformatted with just the numbers here. I'll use that. And so we can just copy this and paste it into Data Wrapper. And the way the browser in Excel works, basically when you paste something from Excel into a browser, it adds some tabs and stuff like that. And Data Wrapper is able to use that to figure out what are columns and what are rows. So it's a nice, easy way to do it. Paste into here, so Control V. And I'll click proceed. And that's step 1 done. We've uploaded our data. So the next step is that we want to check and describe our data. And so there's sort of 2 steps here. One is making sure that our data looks right? So as Francesca talked about, like dirty data, things like that, you know, we want to have the header up here at the top. We want all the data down there below. We also want to make sure that the data is in the type that we're expecting. And this is something that becomes really important when you're doing data analysis and data visualization, that is the data in a particular column. Is it a number? Is it a date? Is it a string? And Data Wrapper makes this pretty helpful by color coding. So as you can see over here on the left-hand side, anything that is a number is formatted in blue. Anything that is text is formatted in black. Anything that is a date is formatted in green. And anything that's really fucked up is formatted in red. So you don't want red. To Francesca's point again, when we talk about simple data, Data Wrapper also works with small data. Right. So David was sort of showing you some pivot tables. You know, you can do all sorts of cool things with hundreds of thousands of rows of data and stuff like that. Data Wrapper is not the tool you use for hundreds of thousands of rows of data. It essentially is the tool to use when your data is already kind of in the format that you want your chart to be, right? Like I've got 10 rows in my data. I want 10 rows in my bar chart, right? And if your data is too big, you're gonna have to use other tools like pivot tables or filtering and sorting it to get it down to a manageable size before Data Wrapper can do anything with it. Okay, so it's not the place to take your 100,000 row data from StatsCan and dump it in there. It won't be useful. Okay, so in addition to double checking that the data is what we think it is, we can also format it. Now, the ironic thing is, after just telling you that, you want to make sure there's no commas in your data, the first thing Data Wrapper does is put commas back in your data, but that's okay because it knows what they are and it's showing them properly. We can also add other formatting to our data. So if I click on column B here, you'll see here that, first of all, I can double check that it's formatted in the way that I think it should be. So it says column type auto number. So it's automatically recognizing that as a number. If we got something wrong, I could just override that and say that's a text field, that's a number field, that's a date field. I can also round numbers. So I can, if there's got decimal places, I can say I don't want to have any decimal places. Given this is political donations, I probably don't care about the 22 cents. So I might say 0 decimal places. You can also divide or multiply by a certain amount. So if all of your data was in billions or something like that, rather than having this really, really long number, you could just truncate it. So it's 3.4 billion or 5.2 million or something like that. We'll keep our numbers the way that they are. And then you can prepend or append things. So that's putting things before the number or things after the number. Can anyone think of, we're talking about political donations, something we might want to put before or after the number? $sign, right? So we just put a little $sign in that prepend box like so. And you can see that it adds it here in Data Wrapper right away. It also gives you like a little sort of mini view of your data. It tells you what the smallest number in your data is, the biggest number, the mean, the median, which is kind of helpful sometimes just for getting a bit of a feel for your data. Okay, so that all looks good. So we can move on to the visualization step.
Would I maybe
Yep.
the first row checkboxes save me a few times? When you
Oh, hide
upload-
column from visualization?
or when you upload the data, it says recognize first row. If
Oh,
that's not-
oh, sorry, is it on this one?
It disappeared. When it recognize it, it disappeared.
You're sure it was there?
Yeah.
I'm not gaslighting you.
It's okay.
When I do the line chart, maybe you
No,
can
no.
remind me to look for it. Yeah. You can actually click on a column and hide that column from the visualization. So if for some reason you've uploaded 4 columns and you only want to use 2 of them in your chart, you can hide it afterwards. Ideally, you'd be doing that in Excel before you copy and paste it over afterwards. But if for some reason you realize, oh crap, I don't actually want that column, you can remove it from the visualization. All right, so we click onto the visualization step. I love Data Wrapper. One of the few things I hate about it is that it always thinks you want a line chart. As a rule of thumb, categorical data like this is not a good use of a line chart. You use line charts for showing data over time. One of the things I really like about Data Wrapper, though, is that you have all these chart types on the left, and then you've got a bunch of other kind of formatting changes that you can make to your data. As soon as you do something, it shows the change, right? So you can kind of play around. You don't have to know what every single toggle and things like that in Data Wrapper does. You can kind of play around with it, see if it looks the way you want it to look, and so on. What I teach my data visualization students is that there's all sorts of really cool charts out there, all sorts of neat stuff that you can do with it. But if in doubt, use a bar chart or a line chart, which is really boring advice, but really good advice because people know how to interpret line charts and bar charts. They may not know how to interpret your weird multicolored tree map, scatter plot, whatever. And also, like, bar charts and line charts are a very effective way of showing categorical data in the case of bar charts, showing data over time in the case of line charts. Okay, so in this case, we want to show the different parties and how much money they raised. So we want to show that in a bar chart. So we're going to click on bar chart here. Okay, and we have already a very basic bar chart sorted alphabetically, showing by the size of the bars that the BC Liberal Party and the BC NDP raised the most money. Once you're kind of happy with the overall look of your chart, then it's time to move on to the refine stage, and then you can make a lot of more fine-grained changes to how your chart looks. So I'm going to click here on refine. And you're given a lot of options here. And again, you don't need to worry about all of them right off the bat. Often the defaults in Data Wrapper are quite good. But again, it's nice to play around with because you can sort of play around with something and you can see instantly, what it does on the chart, right? So something like this, like alignment right now, the labels are aligned to the left-hand side. If I click on right, it will align them to the right-hand side. I don't know if one's particularly better or worse, but you can play around with it and decide what you like, right? And you can easily go back to the previous one if you want to. Okay, the horizontal axis, by default, with bar charts, Data Wrapper always makes the bar charts start at 0. If you work for a political party and you want to make some misleading charts, you can fiddle around with that. But if you're a journalist, your bars should pretty much always start at 0. So don't fiddle around with that. Bar colors, you can just change the overall color of all the bars if you want to, like so. Or you can click on customize color and you can give each bar its own color. My general rule of thumb with data visualization is that people use color too much. They add a whole bunch of color to their data visualizations and it just makes it busy and hard to read and it doesn't really communicate anything useful. With most types of data visualizations, what I actually recommend with a bar chart is you make all the bars one fairly neutral color, and then you make the one bar that you want your audience to pay attention to a different color than everything else, right? Like you obviously have a reason why you made that chart, what do you want them to pay attention to? So let's say in this case, we wanted people to pay attention to the Liberal Party. I would make this all gray, and then I would find the Liberal Party. What was it? BC Liberal Party here. And I would make them say red, right? And then your eye immediately is drawn to that red bar. Now, while that's my overall advice, this is an exception to that advice because political parties are one of the very few situations where we naturally associate certain colors with certain political parties, right? And so unlike, 20 bars on all the cities in Metro Vancouver, and you just decide for fun to make every single one a different color, that doesn't help people. It just makes it look busy and noisy. Making the Liberal bar red and the NDP bar orange and the Conservative bar blue will actually help people to understand the bar more quickly, or if you're dealing with US data, red state, blue state obviously communicates something. Yeah.
That's a quick question. So if you're relying on the way that people regularly interpret bar charts, is highlighting with one specific color the data you want them to see, does it also highlight something data to someone? Like, do they look at it and say, oh, that's different kind of value?
It's a really good question. I don't think so if you're just highlighting a particular bar, but it is a good point because in other types of data visualization, color can communicate something separately, right? Like in a line chart, the different colors on the line, or sometimes in a scatter plot, maybe different colors are communicating something different. So you want to be aware of that. But I think in a case, especially if it reinforces something that's in the title, I think it's pretty obvious that you're just drawing people's attention to that. But I could be wrong. I haven't done studies on it. So yeah. Okay, so in this case, we actually are going to color code. We're not going to color code all of them because I don't know what the libertarian color would be or the platinum party color. I guess platinum would be platinum probably. So I'm just going to do the major ones. So BCNDP will make orange. Conservatives will make blue. And do we have the greens? We don't have the greens there. This right here, like it's sort of on 2 lines, which I don't really like. I could go back to my raw data and I could edit that. I can also edit it directly on the chart here. So I can just go like this and just get rid of the consensus building party. Like this. And yeah. And we can add, you'll see all sorts of choices here. Like we can add grid lines if we want to. We can play around with things. 90 times out of 100, when we're doing a bar chart, we want to sort it from biggest to smallest. And the other 10%, we want to sort it from smallest to biggest. There's maybe like 2% where we want to do it alphabetically, but pretty rarely. The whole point is we want to emphasize the biggest thing. So we just click on sort bars, sort it from biggest to smallest. If for some reason we wanted to emphasize the smallest, we could just do reverse order like so. And that's most of the options for the bar chart. Am I missing anything, Jessica, for bar charts?
Are you going to do the colorblind check? Or?
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, so one of the neat things about DataWrap, and this is actually quite unusual for a data visualization tool, is they've created this colorblind checker. And it'll actually, I believe it will supposed to show up automatically if there's particular problems. And you can actually preview what it will look like for different people with different types of color blindness. So that's more important with some types of visualizations than others. Like in this particular case, the color's fine, but it's not really communicating anything extra, right? But you can imagine certain types of visualizations where the color is really important, right? Like, and people could get confused. A map is a good example, right? Like if certain things are colored one color and certain things are colored another color, you want to avoid that. And that's, even in tools that don't have a great colorblind check like this, you generally want to avoid red and green because most people that are colorblind can't distinguish between red and green. And it's a common thing that we often do. The other reason why you want to be careful with red and green is that red and green symbolize good and bad, right? And in some cases, that's totally fine, right? Like murdering people is bad. Like if I was doing a chart of like which province had the highest homicide rate, I don't think anyone would fault me for making the high homicide rates is red and the low homicide rate green. But there's lots of types of data where it's not actually super clear what's right and what's wrong, and color coding using a green red color palette can get you into trouble. I once did a map of which neighborhoods had the highest rate of immigrants, right? And I didn't use red and green, but I used red and blue. And appropriately, people were like, David's like rolling his eyes in the front row. And people were like, are you communicating that it's bad? I'm like, oh my God, I didn't really mean that, but I didn't even think about it. So like, you want to think about those particular colors have value judgments to them that you may not even intend to communicate with your chart. Okay, on annotate, actually, sorry, I'm just going to also, I wanted to get rid of the color label here. Oh, by default, Data Wrapper adds the color key. Generally speaking, I would only add a color key if it communicates something that's different than what's already in the chart, right? And the Liberal Party and the NDP are right beside the red and the orange, so we don't really need a color thing saying, hey, blue is conservative. So I would just remove that to make it clear. Okay, on annotate, we want to give our chart a title. Insert title here is not a great title, so we're going to try to think of something better. Does anyone want to suggest a title for this chart? Political donations. Yeah, so we could say sort of fundraising totals. You're assuming that I use recent data, unlike most teachers where I find one data set and I don't never update it again. So it's actually for 2012, but fundraising total. Yeah. Yes, it's not recent, no. So fundraising totals for 2012. You could also say something like total amount raised by each BC political party, 2012. And I always feel bad about this because someone is brave enough to volunteer and then I shit all over them, but this is a bad title, okay? I don't like this title, but a lot of people will put titles like this on their chart. Can anyone think what's maybe bad or not great about this title? It's a good point. You might want to think about SEO, but not so much SEO, but a little bit on the right track. It's too long. Well, the other one wasn't as wrong, where we sort of say like fundraising totals. But I hate this one just as much. It's boring. Yeah, so we're journalists, right? And my biggest piece of advice is that when we think of chart titles, we should think like journalists and we should think of them as headlines for our data, right? Like, what is it we want this chart to communicate? What is the point of this chart? That should be in your title, right? So in a case like this, what's the story? What's the message here about this chart? Yeah. Political donations, yeah, but what's the takeaway? What do we see when? Yeah, the BC Liberals have raised far more money, right? And what you can do is I typically make the title of the chart like the headline, and then the subtitle is the technical boring stuff that we need to sort of explain what is in the chart. So this could say something like amount of money raised by each party in 2012. I'll try to spell each properly. Yeah, and so part of this is just, you know, in this case, the chart is relatively simple. Sometimes the charts are not super simple and it's not really obvious to your audience what the point of it is, right? So if you know what the point of it is, you know why you've made this chart, you know what you want them to pay attention to, why would you sort of hope that they come to that conclusion on their own, right? As opposed to just like saying, this is why this chart is important, right? This is a very journalistic stuff. I wrote really cool, super engaging titles for my master's project, and my supervisor said I had to change them all to boring titles. So there definitely are like more government fields, academic fields where they want you to do boring titles. That's part of the style, but in journalism, let's make the charts interesting. The other thing is much like a photo, a chart is visually interesting. So whether you're online or in print, people will often scan something and see the chart first, right? So you might sort of think, well, this chart makes all sorts of sense, like coming after paragraph 4 and before paragraph 5, right? But someone might see that chart before they see any of your stories. So you want the chart to kind of exist on its own, to be able to stand on its own. You can add some other things in here too. Notes will add something to the bottom of the chart, which in this case is actually kind of important because some of you already noticed that the Green Party is missing. So the reason for that is that they were late in filing their 2012 data. So we could sort of say like data is unavailable for the BC Green Party because they were late filing their data. Then you can put in the data source. So in this case, it's Elections BC. You can put in a link to the data source, and I would highly recommend this. And I would highly recommend not doing the lazy thing of like pasting in the homepage of Elections BC, but whatever specific place you downloaded that data, or like for those that were in the StatsCan thing, like we have the specific data set, like send people directly there, right? It's helpful if someone wants to get more information. In the same way that we would link to maybe a court judgment that we're summarizing, it allows people to see that we're being honest and transparent in what we're doing. I don't actually have the link handy though, but if I did, I would put it there. You can put your own name in here, give yourself some credit. And then again, and these are the kind of things that Data Wrapper does very well. They've added an alternative description for screen readers, right? So if people are blind and they're using assistive technology, you can put something in here like this bar chart shows that the BC Liberal Party raised the most money in 2012, and you probably put more detailed things than that. Okay, so the chart's looking pretty good. Last tab here is layouts. There's these weird themes, like you can use like a dark theme and all that kind of stuff. I never really changed that. I don't really change the dark mode. I guess there are some websites that have black backgrounds where it might be important, but most of them have white backgrounds, so I would keep that the same. You used to be able to add social media. Yep, you can add social media share buttons if you want to. And yeah. And then finally, you can click proceed. And by default, your chart just exists in your own Data Wrapper account. No one else can see it. If you're just doing it for text, like an actual like printed paper, you can download it as a PNG file and add it. But usually we're producing these charts so that we can share them online. So we do that by clicking publish. There's a link directly here, but typically what we want most is this right here, this iframe. If you're familiar yourself with using Blogger or something like that, you can go to the HTML page, paste it in there. Or if you deal with a web team at your publication, you can send them that embed code and then they can put that chart directly on your own website. In this case, whether you use an embed code or an image file is not that much different. But there are some Data Wrapper visualizations, and actually the line chart we're going to do next has it, that do have limited amounts of interactivity, like where when you hover over a line chart, you'll see the actual value for that dot on the line or something like that. And that's where the embed code is really helpful because it will retain that interactivity for your user. Yeah.
Rights for this, like say that like on weekends, like we don't have like a graphics person for CTV, so that do I just take a grab of this and then I can just throw it off the broadcast, or is this strictly for online? Like do they own it? Do we own it? Does the creator own it? Like how does it work in terms of being a user?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't spoken directly to Data Wrapper, but to my knowledge, you're free to use this chart however you want, right? Like, and again, like they used to sort of have more paid options, or they kind of had limits on what you could do. And then I think they realized, like a lot of online tools, that if they could make kind of a base level free, then they could kind of upsell people to the higher level. So like CBC is paid for like the deluxe version of Data Wrapper. And so it uses the CBC font and the title and the CBC logo in the bottom and stuff like that. And I think even the New York Times has started adopting Data Wrapper for certain charts. But if you're okay with just the basic kind of fonts and stuff like that, you can do it for free. You can use it. Static images is totally fine. Everybody good? Yes. So on the PNG, I'm 95% sure, we'll see here, you actually have a fair amount of control over how many pixels and stuff it is. So I think you can actually export it at a pretty high resolution. So it'll look pretty, I mean, it's basic, right? And this is why, you know, they have to make money, and so they charge you if you need your own special CBC font or whatever. But, you know, if you're working for a community paper and you just need like a nice little thing, you should be able to download it at a decent quality and run it. And the other nice thing about Data Wrapper, and I'm a bit out of my depth on this one, but I know that they've put a lot of effort into making sure that the charts are mobile friendly. So it should also work. I mean, again, like depends on how messed up your CMS is, but you know, it should work on most mobile sites as well, pretty well. And we'll resize. In fact, I think, sorry, it's always dangerous to do things on the fly because it might not work, but I think yes, on preview, you can actually preview what it would look like on mobile. So it resizes a little bit, right? To be a bit more for a mobile screen. But yeah, again, one of the things that I think is it works well for being a site that's really focused on journalists. When do we go till? 4:20. Okay. All right, so we'll do line charts next. You're not going to get much more than bar charts and line charts today. So in the data wrapper site here, we have this data set. This is from the BC Legislator Library. Again, because I'm a lazy instructor, I haven't updated it since 2013. But this was the percentage of MLAs that are female in each election period. And again, we don't want the percentages there. Letting me format now. Yeah, so I'm going to format the cells. Now, this is kind of a one slightly tricky thing. If I format this as a number, right? So I don't want it as percentage in the same way that I didn't want to have the political donations in currency. So I just want it as a simple number. How many decimal places do you think I want for that number? 1? None? So we can see here the numbers are like 10.9, 10.5, 13.0, 4.2. Someone said 1, someone said none. You want a bit higher?
Oh, like, Price is Right rules.
2? Okay, so let's try 1. Zero, 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 0.1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.1, 0.3, 0.2, 0.3. Yeah, so I want at least 3, if not 4 decimal places. And that's because in spreadsheets, percentages are fractions, right? So 50% is 0.5, 25% is 0.25, 1 is 100%, right? So if you have, well, and if I have 0 decimal places, they all round down to 0, right? So I need to actually think about the fact that these are percentages. And so I'll actually do it at least 3, if not 4 decimal places, because then this is actually 2.1%, 0.021%. Okay. Grab this. Create new charts. Paste it in. Okay, and you can see here, now that we have a date, it's formatting it in green. So it's recognized that as a date. And most times when you're dealing with dates, you're dealing with years, but Data Wrapper can also recognize weirder dates like month and year, or just month, or quarters, or things like that. Our numbers, though, look really weird, right? Like we don't actually want to build our chart with a 0.021. So we need to kind of get that back into it. I realize this is kind of absurd. Like we had our nicely formatted numbers, we made them ugly, and now we have to get them back to our nicely formatted numbers, but that's just the way you have to do with Data Wrapper to ensure that you don't have errors. So we just click on share here. It's recognizing it as a number. This divide multiply, I talked about how you could take millions and billions and divide it by that to get like 4.3 billion or something like that. You can go in the other direction as well. And when you're dealing with percentages, 0.25, if we want to get that to like a nice 25, we multiply it by 100. Okay, so to get sort of Excel formatted percentages into nice chart formatted percentages, we multiply by 100. And then we probably want to have at least 1 decimal place. And then we will append that with a percentage sign. I generally have a bit of a hate on for decimal places. I think they're overused. There's almost no chart I've ever seen that needs 2 decimal places. Most don't even need 1 decimal place. In this case, I think 1 is defensible for the depressing reason that the share of MLAs who are female is so small that some years it's 2.1 and some years it's 2.5, and you want to be able to show that difference. But when you're talking about big differences, often no decimal places is the way to go.
Mary Joseph Preston.
Oh yeah.
She is like crazy about that. Like, do not use
Yeah.
decimal places.
Well, and often too, the decimal places also are give you a sense of false precision, right? Like when I'm doing a poll, I don't actually know the share of the NDP support to 2 decimal places, given that I only interviewed 300 people, right? So yeah. So in this case, Data Wrapper defaulting to a line chart is just fine because we want a line chart. You can see quite visually how there's been a significant increase in the share of MLAs elected who are female. We can change the formatting again. Here on, we're fine. So, I mean, occasionally Data Wrapper will choose the wrong thing, but we do want to generally have the data along the horizontal axis, so year is fine. It will automatically, again, one of the things I like about Data Wrapper is that it's got smart defaults, right? So this is some of the things it does not share with Excel, where Excel's defaults are all horrible. In Data Wrapper, like it's decided, okay, I've got data for multiple years, but I can't fit them all, so I'm going to show you every decade, and that's going to give you a pretty good sense of what we want. But if for some reason you really want to show certain years, you can put in custom ticks here and say, I want to show 1920, and I want to show 1933, and I want to show 1947, and you can show whatever dates you want in there. You can hide or show the grid lines depending on what you want. For the vertical axis, so we talked about how with bar charts, you should not truncate the axis. You should always start at 0. A lot of people in data visualization will say that rule does not apply to line charts. One of my little obsessions is that I think in most cases it does apply to line charts. If you want to read more, I have like a 5,000 word blog post about this, but essentially the reason why we don't truncate bar charts applies to a lot of line charts as well. Not all of them, but generally speaking, you should also start line charts, in my opinion, at 0, unless you have a really good reason for not doing so. Data Wrapper has gotten better about usually starting at 0, and for sure, if some of the data points are 0, it does show them. But if it's not starting it at 0, I would at the very, very least see what your chart looks like with starting at 0 to see if you can still see the trends, whether you think that's a more accurate view of your data. And the reason why is that if you truncate the axis, you can make a 10% increase in crime look like a doubling of crime if you're not careful, right? All right. We're moving down here. You can fiddle around with the number formatting. I don't really like the 2 zeros here on the grid lines, so I will choose this one. Just makes it a little bit cleaner. I think the color is probably okay. I can just maybe just fiddle around with different colors if I like them better. You can change the line width. So generally speaking, if I have a line chart with only one line, I just make it thicker just because it looks better as opposed to having a really, really skinny line without anything else in the chart. You can also fiddle around with the line dashes, but I would not do that. Can anyone think why it's probably not a good idea to use dash lines or dot lines? Forecast? Yeah, so generally speaking in charts, dashes or dots mean we think it's going to do this, right? And obviously in some cases, if it is a forecast, sure. But if it's not, you might mislead your audience by that. You can also fiddle around with the interpolation. This is something you probably don't need to fiddle around with, but I kind of like to sometimes. Some of it's just aesthetic, like you can make your line chart a little bit curvy, just if you like curvy charts instead of jagged charts. You can also fiddle around with using stepped line charts, which look like this, which I tend not to use because they look weird, but the Dana Nerd in me prefers, because the reality is, if you think about something like the number of women who were elected to the legislature, it's not like the number of women gradually increased like every year, which is sort of what, you know, this kind of implies, right? What happened is that on election day, the number went up or the number went down, right? But you know, people tend to be a bit confused by those charts, so I tend to stick with linear. You can fiddle around with the line labels. By default, and this is again is something I like about Data Wrapper, Data Wrapper labels the line at the end of the label, which is referred to as direct labeling. For some reason, a lot of line charts don't do this, and they instead have a color legend. I don't know why people do that with line charts, because it forces your audience to do the extra work of like what color is red, what color is blue, what color is green. Whereas if you just have the label directly at the end of the line, it's a lot easier. You can also, and this is just an aesthetic thing I like, click on use line color for labels. And it actually makes the label the same color as the line. It looks nice. It's also helpful if the line ends come close together, right? And it's not clear which one's the blue line, which one's the green line. And then you'll see here, there actually is some interactivity here, which is nice, where when you hover over the data points on the line chart, you can see the individual data points. And then you can also just, again, an aesthetic thing, fill the area below the line if you want to, add some color if you want to, things like that. I've already asked twice, but when do we finish? Okay, I'm going to show one other thing, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. Just because I wanted to show you the one thing about the annotation. So most of this is the same for most charts, title, description, notes, whatever. But some charts in Data Wrapper have a really nice annotation feature, which allows you to either add things onto your chart or to highlight particular parts of your chart. And this, I think, is one of the most sort of criminally underused parts of data visualization, in the same way that I think more titles should say, this is why I made this chart, this is why it's important. If there's a particular part of your chart that's important, or something happened in your chart and you know why it happened in your chart, like point your audience to it and say, hey, like this is the really important part, right? So we can do this in two ways. One is we could highlight the range. So I can click on add range highlight, and I can just drag a section. So let's say something happened here. I'm making things up, but let's say something happened here that caused a big increase. Oh, that's not what I want to do. I want to do it this way. Hold on a second here. this. Francesca, help me out. Help me.
Go data wrapper.
There we go. There we go. There we go. There we go. So,
So good.
so see, you can make like a nice little highlight there, right? So let's say something happened here that caused a lot more women to enter the legislature, right? And then I can add a text annotation to explain that. Sorry, my thing's jumping all around here. So let's say, and I'm totally making this up. These are not facts, but let's say NDP adopts gender equity policy for its candidates, which it did have something like that at some point, but it may not have been then. So, right, click like this, right? And so then, you know, if this is something important that you want people to know about, you explain what it is, right? This is super helpful for COVID charts, right? And we're going to need this for decades afterwards, where like you're going to show some sort of trend about something and things go totally crazy in 2020 and people are going to forget why, and you're going to say COVID pandemic, right? Like, so yeah, so the highlighting can be a really, really helpful thing to draw people's attention to the specific part of the chart that you want them to pay attention to. Okay. Any questions? I would title this one something like, a record number of women were elected. This is getting a bit long, but to the BC legislature in 2013, something like that. Yeah.
I would add to that, like the Academy and River
Oh, yeah.
options are really
I've not used that very much. Do you want to come show?
Sure. So, Chad showed the little grad cap function.
Move your camera down.
oh.
Just give it actions.
Well, I want to. Yeah, I'll stand over here. Okay. So there is here on this little menu, the River and Academy. And so the Academy is similar to what Chad already showed if you have questions along the way, but I think it's a really great resource to explore because it walks you through so many things in really clear ways, including troubleshooting. And then another resource that Data Wrapper has is it's called River. And this is, people can upload some of the charts that they've created. You can get inspiration from here, maybe not, but you can get some ideas of what other people are using. And if you see something that you think is really neat, or you want to find out how they did it, there's a reuse function. So you can literally just, copy, it'll upload the same chart, and like, you can at least find out if maybe you're like, oh, I wonder how did they do that? You can kind of see the back end and work your way back to create something similar.
So you can work your way back. Steps that-
Yeah,
show you
exactly.
steps that-
It shows you the back end. And so if you see something that is,
Like if you click on add your data, you probably can see the data that they uploaded.
mhm.
Yeah, so you can kind of see, and you can kind of adapt it. And
Questions?
If people have questions, we can.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Decide if you're gonna use an algorithmic scale. How do you feel about that?
Oh, you mean like a logarithmic
Sorry,
scale?
logarithmic, yeah, so that if you start with something like really low, like, I'm thinking
Yeah.
like COVID numbers, and like, when do you use that, and are you hesitant to use that? Like, is that
Yeah.
something we should avoid in general, or?
Yeah, so the best way to figure out if you should use a logarithmic scale is to check your pulse, and if you have one, don't use it. Yeah, because logarithmic scales, no journalists barely understand, and almost all of your audience will not understand. So my personal view is that you're only going to mislead people. So a logarithmic scale is, instead of it going like 10, 20, 30, 40, it goes like 10, 20, 40, or 10, 100, 1,000. Anyway, see, I'm already confused. So like it's just a very confusing way to do things. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe in the early days of COVID, maybe like there's always one exception, but it might be once in a lifetime that you use a logarithmic scale. I think it's used in situations where things are growing very quickly. So I think in the case, I mean, COVID is the good example, right? Where it's like, things were going so fast that to sort of see whether the trajectory was changing. It's okay. So I'll make one exception for COVID, but that's only because COVID itself was logarithmic, right? So it's like, but most data types are not like that, right? And so, as I say, like I don't think I ever used a logarithmic scale in my whole time doing data journalism at the Sun. And so I think it's pretty rare, like that one would actually be the right answer, because there's too much trade-off of, like, there was one that I actually think bitched about online, because it was actually early in COVID where the New York Times was comparing COVID to like measles and Ebola and stuff like that. And they used a logarithmic scale. And it made me really angry, because it made it seem like things were like just a little like that like COVID was almost as deadly as Ebola, but it was like 10 times, like Ebola was 10 times deadlier. Right. So I just think the trade-off is so like, yeah. Yeah.
Thinking that what you said about like, there's a this website is called WTF Visualizations, and people upload visualizations that fit that acronym. And I think it's
Whoa, geez.
Very good. Eh? Not too bad. Yeah, thank you.
it's a good resource for what not to do.
Okay, I'm not gonna be able to find it, I don't think, but anyways. But yeah, so I think the risk of misleading people is just too high. Any other?
Actually, he has a very long neck, apparently. I think it's a soccer player. Oh, yeah.
Here it is, right here. Okay, sorry. It was this right here. Kind of can't see it so well on the thing, but it was like coronavirus is somewhere here, and this is SARS, and this is smallpox, but like if you look here, like it's like goes from, you know, how many, like 1% of people die is here, and like 10% of people die is here, and 100% of people die is here, right? Like, wow. Like, so Ebola is not just a bit worse than, or a bit deadlier than coronavirus, right? So yeah, I think that there's too much of a risk that it could be misleading.
That is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, so on your line chart, do you need me to do the whole question again? You talked a couple times about starting at 0, so it wasn't misleading that you're starting in the middle. I was wondering if you think about the top end that way at all. Like, should it go to 100? Because like from the back row here, it looks like we've arrived in terms of women in the legislature. That's great. Yeah, exactly. We're done. But and
Make the point, and I agree. You could say, you know, well, it depends on how feminist you are, I guess. You could make it 100, but I think you can make a good case that it should be at least 50. Yeah, and then it shows that as sort of as a. I reminded my kids when they heard that Trudeau made half of his cabinet women. They're like, that's not enough. Yes, that's true. I can average it out for the whole. Any other questions?
One more?
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
There's a little bit more that I cover in a whole sentence. This is one morning. You take one morning.
A for effort.